All right, part 4, types of agriculture. The first agriculture that we have in the world involved hunting and gathering, people wandering from place to place, and we're going to talk more about that later. But we're going to look at different types of agriculture and different types of behavior. First of all, there's nomadic and sedentary agriculture. Nomadic agriculture, you're basically roaming from place to place. As you can see, this cow going to different fields, working the open range. It could be moving from one piece of farmland to another, find fertile soil. And then you also have sedentary agriculture, which basically takes place in just one small area. We also have subsistence and commercial agriculture, and this is really important. Subsistence agriculture is the production of food for people. It's for eating locally. There is some subsistence farming that's nomadic, people moving from place to place, some sedentary subsistence agriculture. Subsistence agriculture tends to be small scale and low tech, not using a lot of machines. If there is any kind of surplus, it's traded or sold locally. It doesn't go out of the very close proximity of where it is grown. It is most likely to be practiced in poorer countries or LDCs. Here are some other facts about subsistence agriculture. Hit pause and take a look. Subsistence agriculture happens in different regions. We're going to also see commercial agriculture is associated with different places as well. Commercial agriculture is farming for the purpose of selling that crop or livestock for profit. Pretty much all commercial agriculture is sedentary. Typically, they're going to take their product and they're going to sell it to a food processing company who is going to do something to that raw product. That is a secondary economic sector, and they are then going to sell that product. It's usually large scale and high tech, although it involves a lot fewer farmers. In most developed countries, subsistence agriculture has been replaced by commercial agriculture for the most part. A negative side effect of commercial agriculture is it's going to have a much bigger impact on the environment. Here's some facts about agriculture in most developed countries, otherwise known as commercial agriculture. You can see from the following maps that tractors are more common in poorer countries. Farmers are using technology in commercial farming, and that's where it's going to occur, is in those core countries. You can see this as well. Commercial agriculture also involves the concept of adding value to a product. Value added is the gross or total value of a product minus the cost of raw materials and energy. Very little of the value of most products from commercial farming comes from the raw material. Add value to that raw material by processing it, by packaging it, giving the consumer more convenience. Processing and packaging makes things faster and easier for the consumer. Processing, if you don't know what that means, usually involves pre-cutting things, pre-seasoning things, pre-cooking things, doing something to that food source. Basically, what you're doing is you're taking a raw material and you're turning it into a finished product for the consumer, and you are able to make a much higher profit margin by doing that. When we compare subsistence and commercial farming, we're going to look at 5 basic factors. We're going to look at what is the purpose of the farming, what is the percentage of farmers, what type of machinery are they using, how big is the farm, and what is the relationship with the farm and other industries. The answers to those questions usually can tell you if it is subsistence or commercial farming. We also have 2 more categories of farming, that's intensive and extensive farming. It has to do with the amount of work you're doing or spending time and energy into the farming itself. Extensive agriculture is using large area farms and ranches. Typically, you're not putting a lot of work and or money into it per acre, and you're not producing as much. You're going to support smaller populations with this type of farming. So here are some examples where you can find extensive subsistence farming. Things like nomadic herding of reindeer, or using camels, herding cows. This is the Maasai tribe in Kenya. Slash and burn type agriculture, that you'll see in rainforest areas in Africa and in South America. You also have extensive commercial farming, large areas, especially livestock ranching, pastoral nomadism, which is basically roaming around with your herd. Intensive agriculture is farming on a very small area and putting in a lot of labor per acre. And when we say labor, we mean that could involve actual human labor, or it could involve using more capital. Labor-intensive agriculture is agriculture in which a large amount of human work is applied per unit of output. That means you're doing a lot of work. Things like picking strawberries, they have to be hand-picked, you have to get in there and do it by hand, and so it's going to involve a lot of labor. You also, in intensive farming, might have capital-intensive farming. That's when you use a lot of money in order to get that output, using machineries and fertilizer and things like that. In the United States, we only have about 2 million farmers. And the reason why we have few farmers is because we've replaced them with machinery and we've become much more productive. We found a way to use less people to make more food. Our farm production is at an all-time high, even though our farmers are decreasing all the time. We spend money on chemicals and machinery to do that. In 1950, one farmer would feed 27 people, and today that same farmer feeds about 150 people. So that's a good example of how productive we are, and would be a good example of intensive farming. Farming can be very expensive, though. It involves a large amount of capital, and so that's why most developed countries are more likely to use a high amount of capital in their farming. Things like fuel costs and herbicides, insecticides, pesticides, all those kinds of things make the cost of farming very high, sometimes with a low return on the investment. So if we really look at what we've got going on here, extensive agriculture uses a lot of land but produces less. It can be a lot of work if you're not using machinery. Intensive agriculture is using a small piece of land. It uses a lot of human work, and you could use capital-intensive labor in which the amount of land varies, not putting as much human labor in, but it's expensive. You're putting a lot of money into it, a lot of machinery and things like that, technology. We know that agriculture occurs in different regions thanks to this guy, Derwent Whittlesey. You need to know him. He's an important geographer, and what he did was he mapped out different farming regions, and he identified 12 major regions by climate. It's important to note that some cultural preferences will explain why there's differences in areas that have the same type of climate, but for the most part, he summarized or generalized what types of farming were taking place in what types of climates. You'll see a version of this map in our book. It looks like this, and you can look it over. Now we're on to part 5. What is the impact of agriculture? What has it done? Basically, it's given us several advantages. It's allowed us to have a controllable food supply. In case of famine or floods or some kind of problem, we are able to stockpile food and avoid those kinds of catastrophes. Farming has led to a division of labor. No longer does everyone need to farm to feed themselves. We now have people that have moved into other economic sectors, providing services, providing knowledge, inventing things. So division of labor is basically everyone dividing the work up into different jobs. Agriculture has allowed us to do that. We can do agriculture just about anywhere. That's definitely an advantage. And by farming, we can support a huge population. Jared Diamond has called farming the biggest mistake. We're going to look at that in an article, but he basically said that it's one of the biggest threats to our existence, deciding to farm. So what are some of the disadvantages of farming? Farming radically changes the landscape. We modify the landscape when it comes to things like freshwater depletion, damming rivers for irrigation, losing plant and animal species, deforestation. We also pollute through farming, using pesticides and fertilizers that can run off into water supplies. Farming can help increase soil erosion or using up fresh water. Another disadvantage is that large societies might not be the best thing for people. With these large societies, it has led to things like low standards of living and famine, disease, caused by overcrowding in some areas and not in others. We know that there's an uneven distribution of resources in the world, and so maybe too many people or supporting a large population isn't a good thing for people. And then lastly, farming is a whole lot of hard work. Hunting and gathering would have been much easier. So farming is not without its disadvantages. Another negative of the hard work of farming is it's led to bad things like slavery. We have to consider those things as well. Without farming, we probably wouldn't have had slavery. So when we start class tomorrow, I want you to be able to answer these following questions. Number 1, what is agriculture? Number 2, why is it important? Number 3, what factors does agriculture depend on? Number 4, what's the difference between subsistence and commercial agriculture? 5, what is the difference between intensive and extensive agriculture? Number 6, what are the advantages and disadvantages of practicing agriculture? I'm going to leave you with one last question. Well, what did one farmer say to the other? We're both farmers. Anyways, so we are going to lead into key issue 1, where did agriculture originate? In the next video, we're going to look at where did agriculture begin, where were its hearths, and we're going to talk about the changes and how they happened in the first and second agricultural revolutions. Hope you had fun with this video, and see you next time.
I got passion for my plants, and I ain't afraid to show it, show it, show it, show it.
I'm farming and I grow it.